Thank you for joining us today. This is another Lavelle Law Breakfast Briefs. Today we're going to be tackling the topic cybersecurity. It's certainly a topic that's been in the headlines for quite some time now, as we see more and more occurrences of hacks and data breaches. So it's certainly something that all businesses need to be concerned with. And so today we're going to try to talk about some of these issues that you should be aware of and provide some suggestions that you need to maybe take under consideration. So Lavelle Law, we are a full service law firm, and we have a number of different practice areas. We work primarily out of our Schaumburg office. We also have an office downtown in Chicago. We have a number of different practice areas. Certainly we do corporate compliance issues, which is kind of in the area that we're going to be talking about today. But in addition to that, we have corporate transactional, mergers and acquisitions, commercial litigation. We have a very busy estate planning group that can handle anywhere from the basic will, trust, to complex asset protection and estate and gift tax planning strategies. In addition, real estate, both commercial and residential. We also have attorneys that handle employment and labor law, and also family law. So we have a number of different practice areas where we can tackle whatever legal issues that you may be dealing with. I would also indicate that we provide a free, no obligation consultation to new or potential clients. So if you're looking for a new attorney, if you want a second opinion, I would encourage you to contact us. We'd be happy to sit down with you and hear about your legal issue and maybe guide you in the right direction. Today I want to introduce our panelists. We have there's going to be 3 speakers today. First of all, we have Steve Magala. Steve is a shareholder here with Lavelle Law. Steve practices in the area of mergers and acquisition, banking transactions, some estate planning, as well as corporate compliance. In addition, we have Lance Zebel with us today. Lance is a shareholder here at the firm. Lance practices in the area of commercial litigation. In addition to that, he also handles employment and labor law issues. I want to kind of handle a couple of housekeeping matters before we really dive into the material. First of all, just understand that today's presentation, this is an informational presentation. We're not here giving legal advice to any of your businesses. We're not creating any attorney-client relationship with today's presentation. If you do have a legal issue, whether it's in the issues that we're talking about today, or any other area or issue that you may have, I encourage you to contact us where you can sit down with us so we can understand the facts and circumstances that you're dealing with, and we can have a much more vibrant discussion. But today's presentation, this is not creating any attorney-client relationship. So one other matter, with this platform, please, if you have questions that occur to you throughout the presentation, you should use the chat feature. Send us a private message with your question. We will have time at the end of each speaker's presentation to kind of tackle any of those questions, or at the very end, we'll open it up for Q&A for everybody. So I would just send it through that chat feature. That's the best way to send us those questions. So let's get started. I'm going to start by giving you an overview of where we are today, how we arrived here. As everybody knows, 2020 was a crazy year with the pandemic that forced a lot of businesses to transition to a more remote workforce. Moving to remote work increases distractions and creates vulnerability. As you can understand, businesses are making quick decisions and trying to transition their workers to work remotely. That entails a lot of new software being downloaded, different procedures that are being implemented in a quick way, not always well thought through. Also increase a lot of demand on your IT departments. Many businesses may not have had a robust IT department. That creates pressure there. Any new employees coming in, trying to do that remotely, that's a challenge. It's difficult. And there's always something lost as opposed to doing the traditional face-to-face onboarding. And so all that can create this atmosphere where there's opportunities for hackers. They're aware of these trends, they're aware of these vulnerabilities, and hackers are taking advantage of it. Some alarming data. I mean, anybody reading the paper or going online, you see all the reports. I mean, 1 in 5 businesses will suffer a cyber breach. 70% of all attacks involve a lateral movement. And what that means is, many businesses may have multiple different software systems in place. A lateral movement is when some sort of virus which gets in, they transition from one system to another system and continues to spread throughout the business IT department, which, again, that's a problem because it's impacting your entire business. Hackers will attempt 1 million cyber attacks daily. So I mean that it's going on an ongoing basis. So your business will be attacked at some point in time. Over the past 10 years, there have been 300 data breaches involving the theft of 100,000 or more records. So a lot of these breaches are large breaches, and there's a huge theft of data, and so there's significant breaches. And in 2021, cybercrime is projected to cost $6 trillion. So it's, you're getting to big dollars. Now, as a small business or any size business for that matter, what information do you need to protect? Well, they fit in 3 different categories. First of all, customer data. Number 2, proprietary and confidential information. And then number 3, your employees' password and login credentials. So let's kind of go through those real quickly. Customer data. Any sort of business that you have customers coming to your website, purchasing services or goods, paying for services, they're going to submit credit card and debit card information. So obviously that's customer data. Many times you may submit social security numbers. There may be birth dates or other health information. All that is private customer data, customer information, and that information that a hacker can get a hold of. So if you're a company that obtains this information from your customers online, you're holding on to customer data. Proprietary information. So what is proprietary information? Well, briefly, it's some sort of information that gives your business a competitive advantage. That would include, trade secrets, any sort of, secret that you use to have an advantage over your competitors. Strategies, salary information. This market is getting more and more competitive for personnel, and if your competitors know what you're paying your key employees, that is information that they can use to try to recruit them and steal them away from you. Same thing with pricing. If your customers know, or your competitors know what you're charging your customers, it's easy for them to just undercut your pricing and steal business away from you. So that information you want to protect. Finally, password, login credentials for your employees. This is what lets the hackers into your business. If they have access to your employees' password and login credentials, then they're able to log right into your system, and that could create future problems for your business. And we'll talk about this later today. Lance will probably get into this, but a big problem is employees that simply are sloppy. They don't really care, and they let their guard down. Hackers obtain this information. Once they have this information, they have a key way to get into your business. Are you vulnerable to cyber attacks? Well, absolutely. Everyone is vulnerable to a cyber attack. As I mentioned earlier, I presented you with a lot of data, a lot of statistics. Everybody is vulnerable. Now, historically, it's been limited. A lot of the headlines are limited to large corporations. But don't look at it from that standpoint. From a hacker standpoint, if they can get into a smaller business, sometimes it's easier to get in a smaller business because small businesses may not have the IT structure to protect the hacker. So both large companies and small companies are vulnerable. So don't think that you're not vulnerable because of the size of your company. Now, how do cyber attacks work? I don't want to spend a lot of time on this because I want to, but basically there's a number of different ways they can take advantage of you. As I mentioned before, they may send an email to one of your employees. The employee, innocently or very sloppily or casually clicks on a link, downloads the virus, and then boom, the hacker is in your network. Sometimes a hacker may use software to break your password file. So, you know, one of the strategies is to have strong passwords, changing those passwords on a regular basis. That would defeat the hackers who try to, you know, use software to break your password file. A lot of times, once a hacker gets in, they can install other software. They can install malware where they can watch to see what you're doing. You know, or they can use your computer system to send out emails to anyone in the country. And so there's a number of things that they can do. Again, I don't want to spend a lot of time to go through the various different cyber attacks, but your business is vulnerable and you need to take this seriously. So what should you do to protect yourself? You know, we're going to talk about some of the strategies today, but first of all, I think you really need to consult with an IT professional. More and more IT professionals are becoming very critical to the operation of your business. You know, in the past, you know, you think about human resources professionals, you think about accountants being important to your business. Certainly they continue to be important. Attorneys, of course, are important to your business. But today, an IT professional is something that you have to have. Website compliance, you know, this is one of the topics we're going to talk about today. Steve Magala is going to get into this on what you should be looking to have in your website. Internal policies and procedures. Again, these are some policies and procedures that you should adopt to protect your business. Lance is going to be talking about some of those issues today. And then finally, a business continuity plan. You know, what happens if you're hacked? What happens if you know, sometimes, you know, a hacker gets through? How do you deal with it? How do you handle that situation? So we're going to go through these issues today. So at this time, we're going to turn this thing over to Lance. Lance, you want to kind of talk about policies and procedures?
Sure. If you want to pop to the next slide for me.
Yes.
Thank you. So as Ted kind of alluded to, there's a lot of different cyber attacks that go on, and for U.S. based companies, the last statistic was 51% of them have been targeted by cyber attacks. It's a pretty high number. From an internal employer point of view, you want to make sure that all of your policies relating to electronic usage, and by this I mean laptops, standalone workstations, even cell phones, are governed and provided for in an employee handbook. And then critically important to that, particularly in the environment we've been in the last year or so, you know, that policy needs to apply equally no matter where the person's working. So if they're in the office, if they're remote, or if they're even bringing their own computers to work, this policy needs to cover all of those bases. Next slide, thanks. So one critical component for this is there's always a question of, you know, what right of privacy do I have as an employee? And frankly, the handbook should set out that you have no expectation of privacy, particularly when you're using company internet, company email, any other company equipment like laptops or workstations, and more particularly company cell phones. In other words, if you issue your employees a company cell phone, their expectation of privacy in that cell phone should be zero. Another critical piece is you need to very clearly define what unacceptable uses of your electronic equipment is. Some really big ones, obviously, there should be an absolute ban on downloading files, materials, and images from unknown sources. Even from known sources, you have to be very careful, but that first one is a big no-no. Using another person's login and password should also be strictly banned. Obviously, nobody should be sharing those either, and that should be incorporated into the handbook as well. And then last one is software installation should not be allowed. You know, your employees should not be installing software on their equipment. You should have an IT professional doing it, or if you're the owner and you're doing it yourself, that's fine. But you can't have employees just randomly installing software on there. And then the last thing is here, you do need to be very clear on an email policy. In other words, Don't open emails from people you don't recognize the email address. Don't click on links from email addresses that you don't recognize. Those are all very simple things, but sometimes get overlooked or there's not even a policy for them. So as Ted kind of alluded to, one of the big ways that hackers get into your computers and your system are through files. They're usually received through email, is frankly the most common way. And that's where the viruses and different kinds of things that get into your computer to access information are contained. So again, items from unknown sources shouldn't be opened. And if there's a question regarding the source, you should refer it to your IT people if you have them. Otherwise, it may be safer to just not open it at all. Another suggestion is all of your computers should have virus scan software on them that allows you to search your equipment for viruses or things that are out there. That's not 100% foolproof. There are certain viruses that can't be detected, but at least this will give you a little bit of a baseline to try and protect your electronic systems. So security. Everything should have login and password protection. And now this may seem very simple on its face. In other words, if I want to log into my computer at work, I need to have a username and a password. But there's layers to this as well. So file access, for example, if you have customer list or salary information, or those kind of things, and there's only certain people that need to know it, you can certainly password protect those particular files or folders. So be leery about this and aware of what you're protecting and not protecting, because really just giving everybody a login and a password isn't sufficient to protect some of your information. And frankly, not protecting it can have implications, not only in this realm, but also in the realm of if somebody steals trade secrets or takes your proprietary information. Courts are going to look at what you did to protect it, and probably a login and password to a general computer isn't going to cut it. Another thing you can do, obviously, is engage your employees in training. That's a little bit tricky. I don't think there's any one-size-fits-all training. However, one thing that can be successful is to have an outside company basically send phishing emails to your employees. They're harmless, of course, in the sense that if somebody clicks on a link, nothing happens. But at least then you can start figuring out which of your employees are susceptible to this, counseling them a little bit better, or even seeing what kind of emails or verbiage gets people's attention, just so you have a better understanding and can tell your employees what to be looking for. So we're going to transition here into something a little bit different, which is website privacy policies. Obviously, in the world we live in today, just about every business, large or small, has a website. Not all of them have a privacy policy on it, and it really should. This can be just a link somewhere within the website, but you should have it for obviously legal reasons, but just as kind of common sense. So what is a global overview should this privacy policy stay? It should tell people what information you collect, how you collect it, how you release it, if you do at all, how to update or correct information, give them choices for their information collection, how are you securing this information, placement of cookies, privacy policies with third-party sites, and then there's some miscellaneous issues. So we'll kind of run through these very quickly. So you need to tell people what type of information you're going to be collecting. And there's two kinds. There's personally identifiable information and non-personally identifiable information. And personally identifiable information is really what it sounds like. It tells somebody who you are. So for example, if you go to a website and you order something, you're going to put in your name, you're going to put in your address, your email, your phone number, all of those things, that's personal identifiable information. And a lot of times you have to collect this information to perform a service. If you're an online seller of books, you need to know where to mail the book. So you're going to need that kind of information. Non-personally identifiable information is really kind of this information that floats around in the ether out there, your IP address, your web browser. It tells a person where you're coming from. It doesn't tell them specifically who you are. Any of 10 people in a business could be using a computer. So how are you going to collect this information? Personal information should always be voluntary. And again, it's used to provide a service, it'll enhance the site, fill orders, improve marketing. So you should tell people, here's what we're going to use it for. The famous one is, hey, put in your email address and you'll get a 10% off coupon or something. That's them collecting personal identifiable information so they can market to you. But you do have to have them provide this voluntarily. It's not something you can pull from them. As far as the non-personally identifiable information, generally this is used for troubleshooting, site administration, and kind of demographics. And you should identify that as well. A big one is, what are you doing with this information? If I give you my name and address and all that stuff, what's going to happen to it? So you do have to disclose whether you sell, trade, or rent the information, or if it's used by third parties that are working with your site. You need to disclose how you respond to law enforcement and judicial authorities. Do you cooperate with subpoenas? Do you cooperate with authorities or not? Not every place, some places make it very difficult to even have them respond to a subpoena. So you have to be clear about that. And then you also have to disclose if the non-personally identifiable information is made available to third-party advertisers. A couple other things that you need to provide are a mechanism for correcting or updating personally identifiable information if your address changes, if your phone number changes, and then they also have to be able to remove that information. And then you can have them opt in or opt out as well. And that should be something they can change at any time. People, when they order something, want to know that their information is secure. So your privacy policy also needs to say how you protect this information. Are they providing credit card or other personal information across a secure internet access, HTTPS, as opposed to HTTP? How is this information stored? Is it on secure servers? Is there a limited amount of people that can access this information, and how do they have to access? These are all things you have to tell people so that they understand how you're protecting their information, and of course, so they're willing to give you the information you need to do business with them. Cookies, one of my favorites. If you've ever browsed to a website, I'm sure you've seen that pop-up screen. Hey, we place cookies on your computer. And oftentimes you can decline this, but you do have to inform people if you are going to be placing cookies on their computer. Again, a lot of times this is kind of a pop-up as you go through screens, but if you don't have that particular functionality, you do have to put it somewhere in the privacy policy. You also can tell them that they can decline the cookies. Personally, I decline almost every cookie, but you do have to let them know that they can do that. If your site uses banner ads, you also have to disclose that they will place cookies on there as well, and give the person the option to decline that too. Sometimes you may link to a third-party website, your own website. Could be for payment reasons. It could be for shipping issues. There's a variety of reasons that you may work with a third-party website. Really the critical thing for this is, if you do work with a third-party site, you need to indicate in your privacy policy that that site has its own privacy policies, that you are not responsible for those policies, and that they should read those policies. Frequently, if you are transferring to a third-party site, you may get a pop-up to this effect. But again, if it's not a functionality that your website has, it does need to be contained within the privacy policy. And then the last two things are kind of miscellaneous provisions, and And there obviously are a lot of different provisions you can put in here. From a legal standpoint, I could probably sit here for an hour and do a topic just on that. But the two big ones that I really wanted to point out are age limitations. Certainly, if you are an online cigarette seller, you're going to need some kind of verification or advising the person that only an 18 or older person can be on this website. And then you also do need to provide contact information if the people have questions about privacy policy. This may be a separate department if you have an IT type setup, or I would even suggest if it's feasible, a separate phone number just so you can kind of track that and it's not bombarding your business generally.
Okay, Lance, thank you. We do have a couple of questions with you, Lance, before we move over to Steve, who's going to talk about website terms and conditions. First of all, Lance, there's a question dealing with the employee policies that you talked about earlier in your presentation. The question is this something that is part of the employee handbook, or is this like a separate, entirely different policy that you have your employees sign up and execute?
It can be both. Frankly, generally when I or Josh, who my partner in kind of the employment law practice, when we put together a handbook, you're talking about an undertaking, but there's a lot of sections to it, and generally there is its own section of electronic use, and so where a lot of these issues are fleshed out and dealt with there. Certainly, if you don't have an employee handbook, first I would suggest you get one for a variety of reasons, not least of which is this, but you could have your own separate policy and just have an employee sign off on it and put it in their personnel file.
Yeah, I suppose in a situation where you already have an employee handbook, maybe you want to adopt this new set of policies dealing with cybersecurity. Maybe you have a separate and have them sign off on that, or you could probably combine it with the handbook, have a restated handbook, I suppose, if you wanted to.
Sure.
Another question, Lance. So you had talked about earlier having outside companies send out phishing emails to kind of test the workforce. Can you comment on, if you have an employee that continues to violate or click on these links through this testing? I mean, how do you penalize employees in that situation? What do you do? I mean, does that raise other employment policy issues?
Well, I think there's a couple different answers to that. Number one, I think first of all, if it's a written policy that you have, and the person continues to violate it, I think you certainly have grounds to terminate them. And I also have a suspicion that that might trigger some problems for them with unemployment, which is obviously a concern for employers. But past that, again, I think you'd want to document it, somehow counsel them. But I mean, at some point, if an employee doesn't get it and they're subjecting your business to a potential somebody getting into the computers and taking information, at that point you just have to kind of make a decision about what you want to do with the employee. But I think you'd be justified certainly in taking disciplinary action against them.
Yeah, certainly most of these employees are probably at-will employees. If they're for a set term or set contract, then of course you got to look at the contract. Is this fit in the definition for a clause? The other thing that I've seen happen or tried is that if an employee continues to violate and click on these links when they're not supposed to, require them to go through some additional training is another suggestion, and that will provide maybe, first of all, they may figure it out and learn, but also the whole act of them being isolated and almost embarrassed in front of their other coworkers may be enough to create the incentive for them to figure it out. Okay, so that said, we're gonna move on to the next topic. Steve Magala. Steve is gonna tell us about website terms and conditions. Steve?
All right, thanks, Ted. Good morning, everybody. Go ahead and shoot to the next slide. So terms and conditions agreements, often known as T&C agreements. They're also known by a couple other names: terms of use, user agreement, and terms of service agreement. So these are all kind of different names for the same kind of concept, and we can help you prepare these. So we're going to spend some time today just talking about what these are. Next slide. So let me start by saying what they're not. It's not legally required to have a terms and conditions agreement, unlike a privacy policy where it's legally required. But at this point, it's become really best practice to have one. So it's very important to have one. And so what it is, it's a contract, as you see here in the second bullet, a contract between you or your company, really, and its visitors containing the terms that visitors must agree to if they want to interact with your website. So in the sub-bullets here, it really does two things, right? It describes each party's rights and responsibilities, and then it gives you or your company the authority over certain undesirable things that a visitor may do on your website. So we'll take a look at each of those two things coming up. So which business really needs a terms and conditions agreement? Well, I guess I kind of answered that already in the prior slide, but really any business that has a presence on the internet and that owns a website, and especially if you're offering anything by way of a website or an app, services, software as a service, anything kind of a digital product or service, certainly should have a T&C agreement as part of their website. So one of the things that a T&C agreement does is it protects your IP, your intellectual property. So in the agreement, you want to specify that your logo, your brand, your content, pretty much everything that appears on the website, other than maybe third-party ads, belongs to you. And then also you want to alert people that you're going to force any sort of infringers of your IP, anybody who steals your logo, steals your brand name, you're going to go after them, and you're going to enforce your intellectual property rights against third-party infringers. Another purpose of the T&C agreement is to avoid website abuse. So in the agreement, you want to give yourself the power to delete any abusive accounts, people that post inflammatory, abusive, or explicit content, or who are just wrongly interacting with your website. You also want to disclaim and define the limits of your obligations with respect to what you plan on doing with your website. So any third-party content that you link to or that is posted on your website, you want to disclaim liability for that. And you don't want to be responsible for any mistakes or typos or certainly any content uploaded by users if you allow them to do so. Okay, so the next part of the presentation here, I want to focus on just reviewing some kind of sample terms and clauses, things that we often see in these T&C agreements. So in the introduction, you generally want to answer three questions. What is the agreement? Who does it apply to? And when are the terms triggered? So an example of triggering here is if you look at Instagram's T&C agreement, it says that its terms are triggered when a user creates an account on the platform or uses the app. So that's a good example of triggering. An example of who is bound or who it applies to, you can look at YouTube's T&C agreement, which says that YouTube or the users must agree to its terms before using the service. Anyone who uses the service is assumed to agree to the terms. So these are both good examples of kind of answering at least two of those three questions. All right, so let's talk about acceptance. As in other kind of contractual issues, there's kind of express consent and implied consent, and it's really no different here. So express consent certainly is preferable. Let's talk about implied consent first. Implied consent, you often see this referred to as browse wrap, where the website notifies the user that the user accepts the terms and conditions by just browsing the website, and often it's just a link in a footer on the website. There's nothing expressly required by the user to agree to that. That's why it's called browse wrap or implied consent, and certainly not as effective as express consent. Express consent, you see this by way of either a click wrap, which requires confirmation of that you read the T&C or you've seen the link for it before you use it. And then also you can another form of express consent is checking a box, where you have to check a box saying that you read the terms, read and accepted the terms and conditions. Another thing we see in these T&C agreements is links to other policies. Lance just got done speaking about the privacy policy. Any sort of policies that touch on the company's internet presence, you want to link to, and privacy policy should be one of them. You also want to talk about in your T&C agreement any changes. You want to reserve the right to amend or change the T&C agreement. So you want to let the users know that you have a right to make changes. And then you also want to explain to the users how you'll notify them. Oftentimes it's by email. All right, so another area with respect to sample terms and clauses is you want to describe who the permitted users are if this is a concern for you or your business. You can't discriminate based on legally protected classes, things like race, sex, religion, but certainly reasonable restrictions are permitted. So if you look at Instagram's T&C agreement, for example, you'll see these three kind of categories here. You have to be at least 13 years old, can't be prohibited by law from using it, and they don't want convicted sex offenders. So these are all reasonable restrictions that are not that do not touch on any sort of legally protected classes. So I mentioned this kind of briefly before earlier in the presentation, but again, you want to limit what users can do and describe any sort of unacceptable behavior or prohibited activities. And here, when you talk about the bad behavior in your website, you want to use really broad language. So, use words like threatening, abusive, defamatory, vulgar, any sort of like language that is, if you allow users to post comments and things like that, you want to kind of use that type of language to restrict that sort of bad behavior. And you also certainly you want to prevent if there's any sort of ways for other users to interact with each other or to provide email addresses. You want to restrict any sort of spamming other users as well. So those are things you want to think about when describing unacceptable behavior. Okay, you want to talk about in your T&C agreement as well, termination. And so, that's a remedy if there is a violation for you of your T&C agreement. You want to make sure that that's in there. And so you want to really kind of give yourself the option to either remove content and ban or delete accounts. I would definitely leave those options open for a business if there's a violation of your terms and conditions agreement. So I think you definitely want to get that in there. Also, again, most websites nowadays, they have third-party content, at least with respect to ads, ad servers and Google AdWords and things like that. So you should have a disclaimer in there that you're not going to be liable for third-party content, such as links that lead elsewhere. Another big topic to include in your terms and conditions agreement is limitations on liability and warranty disclaimers. So you want to define the scope of your liability and really limit your damages. Facebook here is a really good example. These 3 bullet points here talk about what Facebook's T&C agreement says. Facebook says, look, our products are as is. There's no promise of being safe, secure, or error-free. They disclaim all possible warranties, and they limit their liability to the fullest extent of the law. There's no consequential damages, so things like lost profits you can't go after Facebook for. And then there's an aggregate limit of the greater of $100 or the amount paid in the past 12 months. So they really try to limit their liability with respect to your use as a Facebook user. So these are all good things to think about for your terms and conditions agreement as well. We talked about intellectual property. We mentioned that before, so we're going to dive into it here. Again, you want to alert the users in your T&C agreement that you retain all rights, all intellectual property rights in your brand, logo, domain names, and your content. If you do provide any sort of like service or software that the users can interact with on the website, here's a good place to describe the terms of that license if you do provide those things. And then also if you accept payment on your website, through some sort of payment portal or something, then you want to talk about how those payments are going to work with respect to both billing and refunds. And then finally, some other kind of more boilerplate kind of clauses that we see. Especially if you're an Illinois organized business, you'll want to specify that Illinois law is going to apply, and if you sue us, you're going to have to sue us in Illinois court. And then also you want to provide, it's a good practice to provide your contact information with respect to who owns and maintains the site. So your business, you want to provide a physical and an email address so people can contact you with respect to questions on the T&C agreement and things like that. And then sometimes businesses have unique needs with respect to their T&C agreement. For us, for example, as a law firm, as you saw in the disclaimer slide earlier, we put a lot of content on our website, things like podcasts and articles. And so, we have in our T&C agreement, you'll see that, all that stuff is not to be construed as legal advice. So if you have a business with kind of those unique needs where you want to make sure the users understand there's certain content on your website that you want to kind of try to limit your liability for, you can use a kind of a more specific clause like that. So in terms of where to display your terms and conditions agreement, we often see them on the footers in the websites. And certainly anytime a user has to sign up or log in, you want to have a link there. And then if you do accept payments on your website or sell goods and services on your website, then you also want to maybe have a checkbox where they agree to the terms and conditions when they check out. That's all I have.
All right, Steve, thank you. We do have a couple of questions for you, Steve, before we move on to the business continuity plan. First of all, a question that came in, does a business need a term and condition agreement if they're primarily a personal service business as opposed to a website that's selling goods?
Yeah, I think, if they're just out there, trying to maybe just do some light promotion of their business, their personal service, maybe they're like a home organizer or something like that. And they provide kind of, some promotional material and, contact information. I think definitely they still need a terms and conditions agreement, maybe not as robust as some of these other terms and conditions agreements we see, from Facebook and everywhere else. But, pretty much every business that has an online presence, I think, needs one.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. It depends on what the purpose of the website is. If it's there for kind of more of a here's what our business is all about and that's it, it's probably not as critical. But if you're taking in consumer data where they're giving you credit card to pay for services or, certainly then I agree with you. They need to have a terms and condition. Another question, Steve, and this could be something maybe Lance can jump in on as well. Part of the terms and conditions are disclaimers on your website. And can a disclaimer, how effective is a disclaimer if somebody hacks the business's website and steals consumer data? I mean, is that disclaimer effective?
I think certainly it's a defense, and it can be used to kind of mitigate your losses and damages. But there's still some sort of liability there with respect to the business, and oftentimes nowadays we see businesses getting kind of cybersecurity insurance, and that's kind of a hot area too. But it's I don't think it's going to completely eliminate liability, but it can certainly go a long way towards kind of minimizing.
Lance, the commercial litigator, what are your thoughts on that question?
I would agree with that. I mean, I think that ultimately disclaimer is not going to protect you completely. I mean, just as a general contractual principle, not every disclaimer protects every situation. So I think, again, it would be a defense. It may work in mitigating some of the damages against you. Ultimately would succeed. Every judge will be different. I don't know that there's a lot of case law out there on this yet.
Yeah, and I think also it's going to come down to, how has the business behaved? Did they behave in a reasonable manner? Did they take some steps to protect customer data? I mean, you get into some of the policies they adopted on their employees. Are they training their employees? How did this hack occur? I mean, if they got through for some crazy, unforeseeable way, then and they took all the required or reasonable steps to protect the consumer data, then that disclaimer may be pretty good. But if you have a disclaimer yet you're still behaving unreasonably, taking a lot of chances and not really following through in your policies, then I kind of agree that disclaimer may not be very effective. Okay, so that's a good question. So let's kind of move on to the next topic, which is business continuity plans. So this is a situation where you've been attacked, you've been hacked, what do you do next? And these business continuity plans, really, it's applicable not just in a hacking situation, but also beyond that. It could deal with any sort of emergency that has impacted your business. So this is about coming up with a business continuity plan that would create a roadmap for you to follow in the event of this emergency, whatever the case, whatever we're talking about. So really, in this situation, you're in survivor mode. Now, we're talking about cybersecurity. So what is the impact of a cyber attack? When we start thinking about, do I need a business continuity plan? Is this really important? Maybe I should just kind of take my chances. Those are some of the questions I'm sure that is running through your head right now. But you need to look at it. What is the impact in your business? First of all, we're talking about reputational loss. If your business is hacked and it gets into the headlines, it's not going to be good for business. It's not going to be good for business. So that reputation is going to take a hit. Number two, management time. You're going to be spending a tremendous amount of time trying to deal with the problem. And that's time that you normally would be spending on the operation of your business. So that's just a lost resource there. Number three, customer loss. As I mentioned, reputational loss is there. Customers who are aware of that, they're aware of the hack, they're going to lose confidence in submitting to your website consumer data. They're not going to want to pay for their goods and services using their credit card. Next impact, cleanup costs. I mentioned management time, but there could be tremendous amount of cost to try to recoup the damages and try to, rebuild that confidence in your reputation. Hiring consultants to try to deal with any problems that you're dealing with. Hiring lawyers for that matter. And then other damages. If you have if your customers, if their information's been breached, customers may be looking to the business to cover their losses, and they're going to expect the business to pick up those losses. Now, maybe you have insurance, maybe you can mount a defense, with a disclaimer, but it becomes a very complicated issue. Do you want to try to fight a customer, or are you better off go ahead and covering their damages? So there's a lot of severe problems if your business suffers an attack. So why plan? As I mentioned, maybe you're thinking I can just take my chances and hope for the best. Maybe, I'm not going to get attacked. Well, data shows that 1 in 5 businesses will experience some form of an emergency every 5 years. And I'm not talking about, cybersecurity emergency, but some sort of an event that could disrupt the operation of your business. Number two, you want to be a leader in your community. And part of that is planning in advance. It's the prudent thing to do. It's the smart thing to do. And any leader in the community should plan in advance. Number three, planning will minimize your loss. It's going to help you get back to operational as soon as possible. And that's really what the goal with these business continuity plans. You have a crisis that's unfolding with your business. Your goal should be to get back to normal business operation as soon as possible. Planning will help you do that. Planning will accelerate recovery. So preparation strategies. Now we're back to cybersecurity. What are some things you should be thinking about to protect yourself? We talked about taking the steps with your website. We talked about adopting policies and procedures. What about some other strategies that you should consider? Number one, I think you should consider a backup of your data, because if one of your employees lets some malware in where there's some ransomware that are downloaded and all your data is encrypted, it's going to be impossible for your business to operate. A backup is a way where your data can be backed up and stored elsewhere that would be insulated from the potential attack, so that if you are suffering from ransomware, you would be able to access that data that's backed up. Now, again, it's not going to be completely up to date to the moment of the hack, but at least you go back in time where you can access some of that data, and you can still, your business is still up and running. How often should you back up? Well, that's a decision you and your IT professional should talk about. I mean, I think, daily would be ideal, but maybe that's inefficient or cost prohibited, but that's a discussion you and your IT professional should talk about. Now, protective systems, antivirus. So for sure, everybody should be using antivirus software. And again, the antivirus software, it can't be perfect. If an employee lets a virus in, that antivirus software is not going to be effective. We talked about procedures that you should adopt. Definitely, we would recommend that would also create, increase the possibility that your employees are not going to do the things that is going to create problems for your business. Other planning strategies, alternative equipment, alternative sites. If your business is, suffered a flood, where can you set up another location to run your business? If your business has key equipment, what other alternative equipment can you use to continue to operate? Those are the questions that you need to start asking yourself when you start preparing this business continuity plan. Key suppliers, vendors, maybe something happens to one of your suppliers, is there another alternative supplier out there that keep you up and running? And then insurance, insurance and cybersecurity is something that is becoming more and more popular. Of course, it costs money for insurance, but it's something I think any prudent business should consider. Risk assessment, what you got to understand your organization. What is critical for operating your business? How did your business achieve its goals? As I mentioned in the prior slide, if you have key equipment that's critical, if you have key systems, what data that you use on a regular basis that is critical for you to continue to have access to in order to operate your business. Who are the key individuals, and if one of those individuals aren't able to be available, is there somebody that can replace them? What is likely to happen as well? You look at emergencies, some emergencies are less likely than others. If you're here in Illinois, you're probably not worried about a hurricane happening. On the other hand, maybe there's a possibility of flood based upon where your business is located. So those are some of the questions you need to be asking when you start putting together a business continuity plan. When we look at risks, it's basically two different categories. You have environmental, which we talked about, weather, floods, tornado, etc. And then you have human-made, which we're talking about theft, vandalism, cyber attack, violence, terrorism. Those are some of the human-made categories. And I think any prudent business needs to sit down and evaluate all those types of potential emergencies that could impact your business. In each situation, you're going to approach it and address it a little bit differently. So again, then after you're done with all the planning and the risk assessment, then that comes into where you actually sit down and prepare the business continuity plan. Again, as I mentioned before, if you are attacked, you are in survival mode. Your goal should be to get your business operational as soon as possible. Now, but first things first, you want to ensure the safety and well-being of your employees. Make sure everybody is okay and not hurt. That's an obvious thing. And then you also want to consider impact to one office, or maybe you have multiple offices. If that's the case, and something happens to one office, is the other office able to take on that additional workflow in order to keep your business operational? One of the issues that comes up all the time with cybersecurity is, I have this here ransomware. This is something we see all the time, and you get hacked and your data is encrypted. Do you pay the ransom? Do you pay the ransom? And that's a question. That's a hard question. I mean, the question, if you pay the ransom, how do you know that this criminal syndicate is going to release your data? Typically you're paying in Bitcoin, and it's really hard to trace it. And so that's always a difficult question to tackle. I think typically when you pay the ransom, I mean, usually the syndicate does release the information, but it is a hard question, but that's something you should think about. Succession and delegation of authority. This is something else you may want to think about. I mentioned who are those critical individuals in your organization, and if one of them is not available for whatever reason, who can step up and fill that void? You should have a sequential list of authority. Also, look at branch locations. Who's going to be in charge of this location? So again, these are some of the questions you may want to start thinking about in advance. So that being said, I mean, we kind of gave a lot at you. I think we have a few more questions to tackle before we let everybody go. We have a question for Lance, getting to some of your policies and procedures. One question that came up: is quarantining software, is that a good idea?
I think it can be, certainly. I mean, particularly if you're a high volume business of emails. You know, for example, I get a lot of email, so I know we use a quarantining software. And just to be clear, what that is, as opposed to a virus type software, it doesn't scan for viruses. It will basically pluck emails that come from suspicious email addresses, and then quarantine them somewhere so that they don't get into your actual email. And then you generally get an email saying, okay, we've quarantined these, and if you recognize an email, there's a way to recover it. It's kind of a really fancy spam filter, but it does reduce the risk of, you know, some of these garbagey email addresses getting through and somebody inadvertently clicking on it.
Okay, thank you. We have a question here for Steve. So this gets to the terms and conditions agreement. The questioner understands that the purpose is to protect IP, or at least one of the purposes is to protect your intellectual property. How do you protect your intellectual property to begin with? I mean, and maybe this is a little bit outside of the scope of today's discussion, but can you comment on that?
Yeah, certainly. So, you know, when we talk about protecting your IP in a terms and conditions agreement, it's, you know, usually with this IP that's on your website. So it's going to be things like your logo and your brand name and business name, and, you know, a lot of those things we can trademark, and we have a practice here that can assist you with that. So you want to get all that stuff trademarked, and then we can assist with that.
Okay, I have a question for me about the business plan. Should the plan be in writing? Does it have to be in writing? You know, this business plan is not like a contract that you're going to be executing that typically you would want in writing. However, I think it's a prudent thing to get this in writing, because you just don't know, you know, if an emergency strikes, you know, who's it going to be impacting. And having a plan in writing, it provides, like I said, a roadmap for your workers to follow in order to keep the business operational. It's very similar to, I think, a will and a trust. You know, you're expressing for somebody in the future as to how do you want to handle certain things. Well, the same thing with the business plan. Having it in writing, I think, is critical. So, you know, people are going to be in crisis mode, and it's going to be stressful. And having a plan well thought out in advance, having it in writing, will make these decisions a lot easier to make. Okay. I think that's all the questions we have. So again, I want to thank everybody for joining us today. I know we presented a lot of information, and if anybody has, you know, more specific questions, I would encourage you to contact us. You know, you can find us at our websites, which are right here: Steve S. Magala at lavellelaw.com, L. Ziba at lavellelaw.com, or T. McGinn at lavellelaw.com, or please give us a call, 847-705-7555. And we'd be glad to sit down and talk to you. We'll continue to handle breakfast briefs in the future. We're hoping to get in person, and I know everybody is kind of eager to get in person, where we can kind of include a networking component as well. So please look out for future breakfast briefs in the future, and we'll hope to see you there. Again, thank you for coming, and have a good rest of your day.